How much is the carbon footprint of UIST 2019? Okay, you can make these kind of back-of-the-envelope calculations, and they're not scientifically super accurate, but they give you an idea, especially if you always make the same assumptions, you are able to compare whether you're going up or you're going down. That's a good thing. We started doing that as an exercise in SIGPlan. And that map over there shows the different instances of SIGPlan conferences in the past few years. And the bigger the circle, the more carbon emissions per attendee. We normalize it per attendee. So clearly, the ICFP in Japan, over there on the right, was a big gorilla, right? So per attendee, there was a lot of carbon emissions. The ones in northwestern Europe and northeastern United States seems to be the ones that are best for this metric. Okay, they optimize something, and if you think about it, you know, we tend to look at the map like a flat thing, but the Earth is round. So the more north you are, the shorter the distances, and that is really noticeable, okay? So things, when you travel in the northern part, things are much shorter than when you travel near, you know, south. When you go south, north-south, that's a big jump. So this was interesting, and then it led us to think, well, you know, if the only metric we have is to reduce carbon emissions, then we should always have conferences either in northwestern Europe or northeastern United States, right? That would be the right conclusion from this data. I mean, but things are not so clear. So I know you cannot read that other chart, but the other chart on the right is, if you see the colors, the blue is North America, orange is Europe, and the other color that's green that you don't see is Asia. So what that means is that the first blue group are all the conferences, SIGPlan conferences that have been held in North America, okay? And the blue bars show the percentage of the attendees that were from North America versus from Europe versus from Asia. And the one in the middle, the group in the middle are the conferences that were in Europe, and you see that the orange bar grew. So basically, for the conferences in Europe, it attracted a lot more people from Europe. And even more striking, the conferences that were held in Asia, which are those little 3 bars on the right, they attracted a lot of people from Asia. So, you know, that premise that conferences actually attract people wherever they go, it's true, right? So they have a very local attraction effect. So it's a good thing that conferences go around the world because you engage more people around the world. So these are hard choices to make. You know, do you fix these conferences in Europe and North America, that region over there, or do you actually go around the world because the conferences are supposed to engage people around the world? These are hard choices to make, and we don't have kind of a solution for this. So what we ended up kind of now lately kind of arguing is that what we should do, rather than imposing, saying, you know, we should optimize for carbon emissions, you know, let's implement a carbon tax. Let's tax ourselves, okay? And then it's up to the organizers to decide what to do, right? So let's say that if you are going to implement a conference in Japan, that we know that the carbon emissions are going to be a disaster. So there's going to be a high tax there to pay, but that's okay. Maybe they can use the money to allow remote participation or something like that. So that's another thing that we can think of doing. And other possible actions are things in the middle. You can offer carbon offsets upon registration, which I know that was the case here at UIST. You had, I don't know if you noticed, but you had the option to buy carbon offsets. That sometimes is a little controversial because you may not know how the money is being used and all that stuff. You can rethink PC meetings. I know many OCM conferences have this practice of flying the PC members all over the world to meet for 2 days. And again, that is relatively costly, although not as much as the actual conference, right? And then you can make small incremental changes to conferences like what we have been seeing here, right? You know, be careful with the how you travel around, take the public transportation instead of a taxi, don't have beef in all the meals, things like that. So there's other things that you can do, little things to kind of improve. And then there's the deeper changes to conferences. Deeper changes to conferences would be rethinking conferences altogether. So let's have, instead of having just UIST in one place one time a year, let's just say that we have an event UIST that's going to have a Loki in Asia, another one in North America, another one in Europe, so multi-site conference that will happen at the same time, for example. Or let's put all of the SIGCHI conferences all together, one mega conference, for example. Okay, there's many, these are deeper changes. Another deeper change would be, let's go virtual. Let's eliminate physical travel altogether. Let's go and do virtual conferences, okay? So this is what I'm going to talk about, without minimizing and underestimating the value of all the other propositions on the table. All of those other options are valid. But I'm just going to dive right into the absolute most radical thing that we could do, which would be to eliminate travel altogether, but somehow preserve the idea of a conference, okay? So that's part 2 of my talk. So let me tell you about the Open Simulator Community Conference. As I told you, it's a conference pretty much like this one, except that nobody travels. Everybody meets in this virtual convention center. The speaker here, this was still Steve Laval, who worked in the Oculus in the beginning. He gave one of the keynotes, and there are the audience, just like you, very similar view from what I see here. This is another room in the conference center for parallel tracks. This is a view from the stage. This is a smaller room for kind of more cozy panel interactions, panel audience interaction. This was a VIP session. Here's a panel in the auditorium, a poster session. There was a poster session. That's the Exhibitors Area. This is a view from the Exhibitors Area, more Exhibitors Area. People bring all sorts of interesting builds. There was a balloon flying around that you could fly and see things from above. These are social events. There are social events. People have live music and dance and chat all the time. And this is a picture from the organizers. There's about 30 people here, which is sort of the scale of UIST, and I will come back to this. The conference in numbers, it's about 2 days. Typically on a weekend, it's a Saturday and Sunday. There's different kinds of things. There's like an official program, and then there's lots of satellite events that people organize. There's been six conferences since 2013, which was the first year that we did one of these, so it has been happening every year. It's about 500 people each year. The max concurrency so far that we had in a single session, plenary session, was 130 people. There's dozens of speakers every year. There's many satellite events. So in other words, it's a real conference, okay? And the next one is in December 14, 15. And if you search it up on the web, you will find out. You can participate. It's free. So far, because this is a community conference, we don't charge any registration, and typically it's the people who use Open Simulator that are interested in the content that is being presented there. Okay, so what software does this run? Some of you may remember Second Life when it was popular. So the viewer is the Second Life viewer. The server is not the Second Life server. The server is an open source a clone of Second Life that has been developed by a group of open source developers, including me, for the past 10 years. So it's an avatar-based 3D immersive federative environment. There's simple in-world 3D modeling, scene editing and scripting. There's support for cloud models. There's text and voice messaging. There's spatial sound, integration with multiple media streams. There is no video capture, but it supports video rendering. So this is sort of what you would expect of many of these virtual world environments. The hardware is, the hardware of the convention center, of the virtual convention center, is a server that runs at UCI. It's one of my servers. So Dell PowerEdge, kind of old now, it's 2011, 24 gig of RAM, 12 cores, Linux, and the viewers run in normal laptops, people's laptops. So here's a picture. So, in preparing this talk, I got finally curious to see what's the carbon footprint of OSCC. So I went to Google and I searched up, the specs for my Dell PowerEdge and things like that, and people's laptops. And as far as I can tell, these are the numbers. So this server consumes about 900 kilos per year, which means that in a week, which is sort of the time that we need to use that server for testing and stuff like that, it's about 18 kilograms a week. And so, and now the participants in their laptops and desktops, which as far as I can tell is about 40 kilograms a year, 240 grams in 2 days. 500 participants, it's about 120 kilograms in 2 days. So in other words, roughly 140 kilograms, which is a lot better than the carbon footprint of all our collective travels here to New Orleans, which is in the hundreds of tons. So it's good. So what's involved in organizing a purely virtual conference? So here's a list. There's different things. So there's organizational aspects with the program, content, scheduling, conference management, websites, registrations, communications, training. There's sessions, chairs, and volunteers. Then there's technological aspects like the virtual conference center, things like groups and permissions, because now you're in virtual reality. When you're in physical reality, we kind of know by our social interactions what's allowed and what's not allowed. But in the virtual environment, you kind of have to re-implement reality again, and maybe you want to re-implement it a little better, more secure. So permissions and things are important things. There's debugging, load testing. There's AV too, and then there's sort of on-site, greeters and helpers, session chairs, the operation of AV, sysadmin to monitor how the server is doing and reboot it if it needs to reboot. So how is this different from a conference? So a conference like UIST, I think there's a lot of overlap. It's exactly the same things that you need to think when you organize a physical conference. There's the extra things in kind of orange are the venue and hotels. That's a big thing that conference organizers know. It's a pain in the neck. And that's like the biggest gorilla that is different from a physical conference that you don't have to deal with in a virtual conference. That's a good thing. Food and beverage, for example, we don't have to deal with that. Wi-Fi is something that you need to think in a physical conference that you don't need to think in a virtual conference. That's good. And then there are other things that you don't need to think in a physical conference, which are sort of the grade ones. So you don't have a virtual conference center. You don't need to think about groups and permissions because social norms apply. You don't need to debug or load test because you kind of, hopefully the hotel that gives guarantees that this will hold a 600 people conference. And you don't need to have a sysadmin to reboot the space here because hopefully it doesn't need rebooting. It's always working okay. So let me talk a little bit more about the things that are really unique to virtual conference, which is the virtual conference center, the things about security and permissions, and then the technical parts of debugging and load testing and stuff like that, and the sysadministration. So one thing that we do at the OSCC is that the organizing committee, of which I was a part in the beginning, but actually I'm not a part anymore, they meet in World, so they meet at the conference center, and they plan the conference at the conference center. The conference center, they actually redesigned the conference center a little bit from year to year. So one of the things that they need to figure out is what kinds of spaces do we need for the conference, right? What kinds of rooms? What kinds of different spaces do we need? We need an auditorium, we need different kind of rooms for people to meet. We need the exhibitor center. There's a part that people can buy stuff. So there's, this is all part of the planning, and this planning team is just amazing. They really know what they're doing. So here's, for example, the areas, the different areas in one of the years. This was not the first year. So there's like the conference, the auditorium, like this auditorium right at the center. Then there's these breakout conference rooms on the second level, and then up there is the exhibitors areas. There's a shopping mall here. There's what's called the landing zones. Landing zones are the registration areas where people, when they come to the convention center, that's where they land first. And that's because, not just because it kind of makes sense to land in the outside of the auditorium, but also for performance reasons. Login is a heavy-duty process. You want the instantiation of the users to be done outside of the main action of the talks, not to disturb the conference too much. So you want to do that aside and then bring people finally into the auditorium. So there's social and technical reasons for having these landing zones. Other things that interesting, that there are things that you can do in presentations in the virtual conference that you cannot do in real life. So not possible in real life. And this is a speaker who has just created out of thin air something that he's talking about. So as if I was here and I can actually create something here in front of you, which is something that we can all imagine in the future with augmented reality, right? I'm just going to instantiate something here, but we can already do that in virtual reality. So we actually allow the speakers to do that if they have something to present. So this is something that you cannot do, at least so far in real life, that you can do in virtual reality. So security and performance, there's group-based capabilities basically for who can do what where. And this is to avoid things that kind of happen, really weird things that happen in Second Life sometimes, where people were trying to have a serious meeting and there was this griefer group that started, instantiating fallacies all over the place or, weird objects that completely disrupted the environment. So security is an important thing, and permissions. We also do load tests before the conference to make sure that the conference can handle, up to 200 people concurrently at the same time. And we designed the space with that performance in mind. This is, separating the landing zones from the main auditorium, thinking performance, because we want to be able, and as time goes by, we want to be able to increase the number of concurrent people that we can hold at the same time in the same shared space. And so performance is a big deal. That's sort of my involvement with this project is pretty much on the side of systems support and performance improvements to be able to hold something like a 500 people conference. Okay, that's sort of what I would like to be able to support. So let me give you some reflections about OSCC. What is a conference? This is sort of the first time that we organized OSCC. It had a big impression on me. It really hit me because it was so intense for me. I really had the feeling that I had gone to a conference. I went to a conference. So, I didn't need to travel, but I was there. And so what was a conference? A conference is basically a large group of people coming together at the same time, in real time, to share experiences formally and informally, right? And that's what, the physical space is something that so far we have to have it, but maybe we won't in the future. Maybe we can do without the physical space. Maybe we can do all of this sharing and experiences in the virtual space. I certainly had that experience with OSCC. It really feels to me like attending a conference, like as much as I feel like when I'm here, really. Mental space is absolutely important. Okay, you have to be there in the zone. You have to be aware that you are participating in a conference. If you are not there, and many people here are not here, okay? You come to a conference and many times you just check out. You're checking your email or whatever, it's just not here, part of the conference. Okay, I can tell that because I do that too. But when the mental space, when you are there, it doesn't matter if it's physical or if it's virtual. You are there. That's the experience that you are having. So the technology is not there yet for the masses, but it's good enough for some niche communities. And OSCC is one of them. And this is because this is people who use Open Simulator. They like to use Open Simulator. They socialize in these virtual worlds for whatever reason, and they just enjoy this conference. And so it works for this community. It doesn't work for everybody, okay? But for this community, it works very well. And another thing is that this end-to-end stack that I have been witnessing, which is from technology all the way to a conference operation, is actually allowed me to coach the future of virtual conferences. This is not just a demo, okay? This is not just a little study that I did to get some empirical data about whether people like this. No, this is the real thing. This is a conference. And the technology right now works only for these niche people, but I can see the whole thing. I can see where this is going. And so let me just tell you about what makes OSC successful. And I think I zoomed in on 6 things that make this conference successful. Starting at the bottom. So the virtual conference center is important, okay? The world that you see is important. And in the case of OSCC, it's just fun. It's a fun environment. It's lively, it has colors, it's just a fun thing. Just like in real life, right? This is a nice room. There are many conferences sometimes that are held in just boring places, and you kind of feel bored because it's just a boring place. So the place kind of influences your perception of the conference. And that's true in the virtual space, too. Another one is interaction design. This one, we're very far from where I would like to be, but there's certain details. For example, when people come into the auditorium in the virtual space, they are asked to sit down, just like a real audience. So sit down. And so in that process of sitting down, there's a script in there that positions their camera exactly where I think the camera should be looking, right? Not each one of you. But so they sit down and their camera basically zooms more or less just like what you are seeing now, which is zoom at the stage. You see the speaker and you see the screens, right? And the people, the participants don't need to figure out where should I be looking and like where is my camera and stuff like that. No, things just snap. Right? So there's lots of little details like that in the design of these virtual objects in this virtual space that again, we're still very far from where I would like it to be, but I can already see that interaction design in 3D space is an important thing, super important thing, that there's a ton of interesting research questions in there for all of you. Another thing that makes OSCC work, and this is sort of a weird thing, but it's decentralization of identity and appearance. And what does this mean? Open Simulator has a sort of a federated architecture. What that means is that people can run their own virtual worlds independent of each other. There's no central server. So I run my own virtual lab, somebody else runs their own thing, and some grids, what's called grids, some of these virtual worlds are very large, others are just little islands. So some are lots of users, others have only a few. And this is important, but so it's a federated architecture. We can all come together. We can visit each other's worlds, and we can all go to the virtual center. And when we come here to the conference center, we come with our own avatars from our world. There's no imposition from whoever is running the conference about the appearance, right? You don't suddenly get all, dressed up in suits. Right? Everybody brings whatever they feel comfortable in bringing, however they think of themselves in this virtual space. So this is actually important. Another thing that makes OSCC successful is the social interaction, because again, this is a community that's relatively tight to each other. There's a lot of constant chat during the conference. People are, the keynote is speaking, but people are constantly chatting. You can see the chat going, blah, 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 blah. And questions that are typed. And even for the speaker, it's super rewarding because it's like you see a stream of consciousness from the audience. I can see, as a speaker, I can see what a lot of people are thinking, what kinds of questions they have. So it's kind of interesting, super engaging. So also the exhibits, the dances, the satellite social events, that's all contributes to the social interaction. Number two, the organizing team. I mean, it's amazing. They know how to pull these virtual conferences, and they make an amazing job, really. But finally, what I think is the number one is the program and the participant engagement, and those, I think those are two sides of the same coin. I mean, the program needs to be interesting for the participants. Okay? There's no absolute notion of interest for any program, right? If you go participate in a conference about microbiology, you probably feel completely disengaged because you know nothing about microbiology, right? So if you go and suddenly attend OSCC this year, maybe you don't take anything out of it because you don't feel connected, you don't know what's going on, right? Maybe you want to see sort of as an extraterrestrial, you zoom in, you land in there and you try to see what's going on, but you're not connecting, you're not engaging. So, but for the participants who are part of that community, this is really important. The program needs to be good and needs to be engaging for them. So again, there are different parts in here. You know, the C has more to do with technology. The B part has to do more with the social aspects, and the A part has really to do with the conference itself. And if you don't have a good organizing team, if you don't have a good program, then it's not a good event for anybody. Now, this is also true for any conference. What makes any conference successful? Well, you know, the technological parts are not important, but everything else is important. You need to have a good program, and you need to have participant engagement. So it's not that different from a physical conference. It's sort of the same. Some challenges of OSCC. This is my workstation. Okay, this is what I see when I'm participating in OSCC. One interesting thing is that I can have my own mixing table, right? I can be in several parallel sessions at the same time. Visually, I can do it. The only thing that I cannot do is the audio. Our brain still cannot process multiple parallel audio streams, so the audio needs to be just tuned on one. But so I'm here in my office. I'm not at the conference. I'm sitting the entire day. This is my daughter. Maybe we're using a headset, a virtual reality display with that thing, for 8 hours in our head. That's kind of a challenge. So basically, the meet space now is the thing that we need to rethink. What are we going to do with the meet space in virtual conferences, right? So, number one problem, time zones. Okay, this is a challenge, time zones. If we are all coming here to New Orleans, then we are all forced to be on the time zone, even if we are completely jet-lagged. But we agree that this is a time zone and we're all in this time zone. If we are having a virtual conference, then we don't have that social agreement. And I'm in California time, you're in Australian time, and it's a big mess. Another problem, the breaks of the conference may not align with the meal times. Right? There may be a big break that is actually not coinciding with lunch, and then the lunchtime for you is there's not a break at the conference, and it's kind of annoying. You're sitting all day. There's another one that's important is real-life interruptions, because if you are doing this at home, which is usually where people are, there comes your kids or your significant other, knocks on the door, did you get the mail? And so that's also a problem. It breaks the experience of attending a conference, right? And finally, another thing, little things that there are no physical tokens for remembering the event. When we come here, maybe we'll get a little totem bag or something from New Orleans that in these virtual conferences we don't have. So some mitigating actions. It seems that the 7 a.m., 4 p.m. Pacific time is the least bad. It kind of works for the Americans and the Europeans, and maybe for the late-nighters of the Asian world. It's not ideal, but it's the least bad. Another thing that we do at OSCC, we actually have events 24/7. We're doing those 2 days, we have events continuously. And so people that run these virtual worlds in different parts of the world, they can have their own parties or their own little events, satellite events at the times that are during the day for them. The other thing is, have snacks and water around. Sitting all day, this is something that we learned from the first time that we organized the conference. We started doing longer breaks. So every hour or every hour and a half, there's like a half an hour break for people to actually stand up and stretch out and do physical exercise. The real-life interruptions, that one, you have to mentalize it. Again, you have to be in the mental space. You are attending a conference. So you have to close the door. And you have to tell your family, look, I'm at the conference. Don't interrupt me. Basically, you have to tell them, I'm not here. Just, your husband wants you to go cook it. No, I'm not here. Just figure out yourself. Basically, you just have to have that discipline. You can only solve that with discipline. And one thing that we experimented in one of the OSCC conferences, we actually mailed in some tokens, some little cubes to people who wanted a little token, physical token from the, so you can emulate this giving out little things by mailing it in the mail. So that's something that you can do. All right, so let me go to the last part of my talk, which is how can we scale this up beyond the open simulator community well, it does. One thing that I should say is that this does not extend to outside of this community. The viewer itself, the program that we have to install in the laptops is just brutal. It's just clunky. It's an intuitive interface. It's hard to learn. It's basically only the highly motivated people can climb that learning curve. It makes certain interaction designs very difficult, very frustrating, have all sorts of grievances with respect to the Second Life viewer. Another problem is that unconstrained 3D space can be confusing if people are not used to it. It's like, where should I be looking, right? What's going on? Where should I go? So if you don't design the space very carefully to tutor people about where to go, how to get there, then it's going to be a bad experience. So again, interaction design is really, really important. And in fact, I know this because we had a meeting, a SIGPlan is an executive committee meeting in my little virtual island. And it kind of worked. Here we are, about 12 of us. And these are all people who are not gamers. They don't know anything about virtual environments. These are programming languages people. They don't play games or anything. So, and it kind of worked. We were here for about 6 hours, and it worked fine. We did what we needed to do. But it was kind of a really very steep hill to climb for them to actually log in. It's super cumbersome. So I know for a fact this is very, I'm not selling here Open Simulator because I know that the viewer really is not good, and it's a climbing, very steep climbing hill for people to cross. So let's do this for real. Basically, we need better virtual reality software for building these environments, for doing the interaction design in these environments, for experimenting with different modalities. We need better stuff. That is one sort of call for action that I think this community might be particularly susceptible of hearing. Now let me talk about something else, that conferences are not just a technical part, but it's also business models. And conferences are, for many nonprofits, a business model. And that's true for ACM, IEEE, USNIX. And this is, I don't know, the younger people may not see this, but for those of us who have been involved at these executive committees in ACM, this is very clear. And in fact, you can search up the ACM tax returns if you want to see how the ACM works, and it's something like that. The red 43% is revenue from conferences. So about half of ACM's revenue is because of conferences. So if you go and say, okay, let's get rid of physical conferences, that whole thing goes away. Now what? You basically undermine the organization entirely. So we have to think through some of the consequences of what we are projecting here. So coming into the end of my talk, basically, what do we need to get virtual conferences for all? There's like a triangle that needs to be in the right balance. It's the culture, our culture. Do we really want to continue to travel all over the world? It's our choice. It's fun to travel, but do we really want to, or do we stop traveling so much? That's part of the culture. We need to have an answer to that. Do we want to change the culture or not? Another one is the technology. And we have been doing it in Open Simulator, but there's other platforms that can be used, and there's definitely a ton of improvements that can be done. And the third one is financial models. So for OSCC, because it's a community conference, everything is free and there's no registration. The organizers, which are amazing, they do all that work for free. But something like this probably cannot be done in that style. You need to start charging at some point something. So all of that needs to be thought through. And I finish with a call for action. Virtual conferences can drastically reduce carbon emissions while still bringing people together at the same time in real time. I know for a fact because I have been participating in one of these for the past 6 years. It is true. You can do it. I have one data point. It's not the same experience, but there's a large overlap. So there are things that you can do in physical reality conferences that you cannot do in virtual reality. And there are other things that you can do in virtual reality that you cannot do in physical reality. But then there's also a big overlap. The conference organization is almost exactly the same. You have to think about the program, you have to schedule, you have to find the right topics. So there's a lot of overlap there that is the same. There are many work-in-progress technologies that can be used in niche communities right now. So OpenSim is one of them. There's Mozilla Hubs. There's High Fidelity. Even Google Hangouts. I mean, you could imagine trying to organize a virtual conference in Google Hangouts. It's not impossible. But organization and planning is the key for success. If you want to go beyond a little demo or a little experiment that you collect data on, you really need to organize, just like what you organize here for UIST with 2 years in advance. If you want to organize a good virtual conference, you have to start planning, not 2 years, but at least 1 year in advance. You cannot do it, you cannot just expect that the technology is going to, magically implement a conference out of thin air. It's not going to happen. So you have to think through the organizational details as much as a physical conference. And design the whole experience, not just the technological aspects of it. Okay, so design everything, the program, how the speakers are going to interact with the audience, everything needs to be designed. And I'll leave you at that. I'll take some questions. Thank you.
Okay. Very nice talk, thank you. Paul Cinti with Adobe Research. My question is, how do you successfully disengage from your ordinary life to attend one of these virtual conferences? Because for me, there's a huge difference between attending a conference that I have to travel to attending the same conference that I can go home at night, or an on-site, off-site versus an off-site, off-site. Even if you're both in laptop closed, no phone situations, it's a different headspace when you get out of your normal environment to attend these. So how do you achieve the same thing?
Right, so you could. So in my case, I just decided this weekend I'm going to attend OSCC. So I just close myself in my office. I tell my partner and my daughter, and don't expect anything from me because I'm not here. And it's sort of discipline. I want to attend. So I mean, discipline can get you a long way. So another thing that I do in physical conferences, okay? I used to be like so many of you. I would sit in a talk and I have my laptop and checking my email. Lately, I'm not doing that. I just decided that if I'm in a conference, I'm just going to close my laptop and I'm going to listen to what was going on right there. Because I'm there. I should be listening. So discipline, that's the only thing that I say. If you are disciplined, and then you can get into a mental space of attending a conference, be it physical or in the virtual space. But you're right. I mean, when you are physical, you are being forced here. So you already are in a different place, right? It kind of helps you, your mental place too. And with the virtual conferences, you just have to try a little harder. There's a question down at the back.
Oh, we're coming. Can we pass this? Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle Annett from Mishmash Makers. I think that one of the most engaging aspects of UIST is the demo session and the Student Innovation Contest. So I'd like to know what either your recommendations are or the ACM recommendations are for implementing that in a virtual conference.
So the ACM does not have any recommendations at all. All of this is my own experiment. So we had poster sessions in this virtual conference. We had demos, lots of demos, and basically the subject matter is virtual reality, so it's a good match. So if people are doing virtual reality in a virtual space, they can do their demos right there. So they can show their little scripts and objects, whatever they do. So it can be showed right there. So it kind of works. The poster session, it's very similar to a real poster session. So we have audio. The posters are separated in different audio channels. And so you approach a poster, the author is there in that poster channel. You approach, you start interacting just like you would. It's not that different from the real physical poster session, too. So all of that is possible to design, and there's lots of interesting things how to design that even better than what we did.
Hi, Alexandra Ahn from ETH Zurich. I thank you so much for your talk. I think it's very interesting. You had this image from like this disco environment, yeah, where people were dancing. So I was wondering what did people do in real life? Like, did they have like a little bar? Did you get your husband to get you beer and things like that?
So this happens to be one of the very popular activities in this community. It's live DJing from people all over the world, and I don't know how they do it because I don't know. So apparently, there's a lot of people who have like music studios in their home, and they are able to stream live, right? So many of them actually is live concerts, singing and playing, or some of them are DJing live. And they just stream, and everybody else hears what's going on. And so they put their avatars in dancing animations. In real life, when I go to these things, I'm actually not dancing. But it could be an interesting thing, especially if you're going to starting capturing more of the physicality of people. You could imagine that as you are dancing, those movements are reflected into the animations of the avatar. But I don't think that anybody is dancing in real life when they put their avatars dancing.
Just a very short follow-up question. Do you have any data, or I mean, maybe not data, even informal data, like how do people kind of evaluate that social aspect?
I mean, that's the big thing. It's really, these virtual worlds exist because people want to interact. And I can tell you that there's a lot of different people who use Open Simulator. So it's a sort of an indie platform, right? So anybody can install it. And so there's things going on. There's a lot of people with disabilities that use this a lot because they are isolated. And so this is a way of them to connect and kind of be social, dancing inclusively, even physically that they cannot dance. They put their avatars dancing, and it's kind of pleasurable. So there's that. There's people who use this stuff for like gambling and all sorts of other things. But the social interaction is the big thing. It's definitely the big thing. There's this, in these virtual worlds, there's two big things. It's the social interaction and it's the building, the 3D building, because this has a very simple 3D building capabilities. It's much simpler than using Blender or Unity 3D or something like that. It's super, super simple. So anybody can build stuff in here. And it's very, again, it's very rewarding. It's very nice to just build stuff out of your head and just, so those are the two major things. It's the social aspect and the building.
Albrecht Schmidt from the University of Munich. Here. So I was wondering, you started off with that sort of the conferences are a very recent thing, sort of seeing it on a bigger scale. And if you look into scientific history, it's sort of something like from the 60s, 70s. And otherwise, it was very local. And if you go a bit further back, the lectures. And I think also the tech community has pushed more on this. And my question is really, we put a lot of effort in to create a phenomena that was sort of developed quite late and also not in sort of all the sciences. So what is your take? Should we sort of go one step back and really rethink what it's really about? What are sort of the main things? And you had some of them, and whether it's really sort of building a conference in virtual worlds, which imitates a conference, which maybe, and a conference maybe already the wrong thing to do in the first place. Yeah. So do you have a take on that?
Yes,
Should we really just go back?
I have a take on that. Yes. I mean, and that is sort of the reason why I got involved in the proceedings of the ACM journal series, because it was clear to me that what's going on in our conferences, in our research conferences, is two things. It's the scholar activity of writing out, describing our research in a peer-reviewed model, and it's the social aspect, the networking aspect of, getting newer people into the community, talking, making connections, starting projects together. So those are two different things. And the scholarly aspects of the conferences, they can completely be done in a journal, like all the other sciences do, right? We don't need to reinvent processes that have been around for centuries. So the proceedings of the ACM were created sort of as a bridge towards, okay, we created this thing, which is the conference. We like it a lot. We do not plan to ever get rid of some of these conferences that already have some reputation, and we don't want to destroy it and just drop it on the floor. They are this hybrid of many things. Great, let's continue. And let's put the scholar part in where it rightly belongs, which is a journal. And now let's think about what to do with the rest, with networking. How can we preserve the good things of networking? Right? Maybe we can, we can continue doing what we do, or we can think of other options. Right? There's more things that we can do.
Hi, Roel Vertigal. I just wanted to say I'm speaking on personal title here. I wanted to give some pushback for this idea. I've been studying social interactions in virtual environments ever since my PhD, and one of the things I found is that face-to-face interaction is irreplaceable. Absolutely. At least for the moment. Yeah. Maybe 50 to 100 years from now. The richness of face-to-face interaction involves light fields. It involves no augmented faces so that you can have eye contact. It involves haptics. It involves also haptics with objects, like going out to a place and having a group socialize. And these are things that with the current state of technology, even in VR, are just
not there.
Not there.
Absolutely.
And so if we are to actually take this seriously and stop this conference, I understand the carbon footprint. Like, it's nice that we have these, like, paper badges now, but, the carbon footprint of doing something like this is insane. I agree with you, and there's something should be done about that. But what I do think that this is a potential solution for is for all those conferences I don't go to. Because there's dozens of conferences in my field. Absolutely. I can't always be on the road. And so I miss those conferences. And I think if you had something like this, it would potentially be a way of going to every conference. But then I still want the conferences to have that physical thing that I can go to the UIST conference and meet my buddies and interact face to face.
I mean, point number one, there's no replacement for face-to-face interaction. I think we all agree. That's not, of course. The question is, as he was pointing out, we have, as a community, as a culture, we have created this thing of these research conferences, and this is a new phenomenon. And the question is this really the right thing to do? right? That's the question. And there's no, I mean, nobody questions the value of face-to-face interaction, you know, the value of conferences, of bringing newer people into the community, of having the younger people talking with the more senior people. And so there's enormous value in all of that. And that's the reason why we don't just want to drop conferences out, you know, on the floor, because there's a value in networking. So but the question I think that we should all be asking is, given that these conferences have such a, you know, completely insane carbon footprint, is there anything else that we could do that would perhaps not be as good in terms of the networking aspects of the conference, but it would be, you know, okay, maybe. And you know, yes, we would still meet once a year. You know, maybe we'd still organize one big physical conference a year, but maybe we don't need to travel so much. Maybe we don't need so many conferences. Maybe we could, some of these conferences could totally be replaced with virtual events and nothing would be lost. Maybe, I don't know. But so I'm bringing more questions than answers, really.
Yeah,
and
so I think what you're proposing is a general rethink, and I think that's a good idea. So we need to just open the design space and go like,
exactly.
Should we just plant more trees, or should we have fewer events, or should we have a 3-week conference where all the conferences are stacked together in one location? Probably not. You know, but yeah, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really just opening up the space of possibilities, given that, you know, we have these technologies coming up, and it's time that we start thinking some of these assumptions about our own culture and our form of living in the world. That I think we can do it now. We can question this.
Thank you.
Thank you.